Okay, so Monday afternoon, a massive power outage hits Spain, Portugal, parts of France too. Millions plunged into darkness.
Yeah, quite something. Homes, shops, no power.
And people stuck in lifts, that's quite scary traffic, just seizing up, no traffic lights. Chaos at stations, airports.
Total disruption. It really suggests something significant happened, not just a small local fault.
Exactly. So let's get right into this. In this deep dive, we want to explore what might have actually caused this huge event.
We'll be looking at the early reports, some expert takes. The full picture isn't clear yet, obviously, and investigations are ongoing.
Right. It's like a puzzle they're still piecing together. But there are some strong initial ideas, and this whole thing really highlights how complex and maybe fragile our power grids are becoming.
Absolutely. It's a major issue.
And for those of you listening who are preparing for the UPSC exam, pay attention. This touches directly on infrastructure, energy security, disaster management, really relevant for mains, maybe even prelims questions.
Definitely. It's a real-world case study.
For everyone, though, it's a fascinating glimpse into the systems we all rely on, literally every minute. Our main source for today's discussion is the Indian Express.
Okay, so where do we start? The main suspect, initially at least, seems to be this electricity interconnector, the one linking France and Spain.
Interconnectors. Explain those quickly.
Sure. They're essentially high-voltage cables, can be underground, sometimes under the sea. They link different countries' power grids, letting them share electricity. Think of them as energy highways between nations.
Got it. So a problem on that highway.
Exactly. Early reports, like from a European power sector rep, pointed to an issue specifically with that France-Spain link.
Right, and we heard Christian Ruby from Your Electric on the BBC mention a specific incident there, potentially cutting Spain off from the wider European grid.
That's the theory. If that connection fails, it creates an immediate imbalance.
But could that single failure cause such a massive multi-country blackout? Seems like a big leap.
Probably not on its own. No, that's the consensus. It's a strong suspect for the trigger, the first domino maybe. But other factors likely played a role in making it spread so far.
Okay, so one piece of the puzzle. But then there's this other idea from Portugal's grid operator. They mentioned something quite different.
Yes, they talked about a rare atmospheric phenomenon.
Atmospheric, like weather.
Potentially. They said it caused anomalous oscillations, basically weird fluctuations on high voltage lines in Spain, and that's what tripped the system in Portugal.
What kind of atmospheric event could do that? That sounds unusual.
It is unusual for something this big, maybe extreme space weather, like a geomagnetic storm, or perhaps very intense, very localized freak weather. It could potentially induce voltage swings on long power lines.
So that could stress the system, maybe in combination with the interconnector issue.
That's plausible. You have one potential weakness, maybe the interconnector, then add this unexpected stress from the atmospheric event, and suddenly the grid can't cope. It pushes it over the edge.
It also raises questions about how prepared the grid is for, well, unexpected environmental stuff.
Definitely. Resilience is key.
Okay, one thing that seems off the table, thankfully, is a cyber attack.
Yeah, both Spain and Portugal seem pretty clear on that, at least based on initial findings. They've ruled it out for now.
Phew. One less thing to worry about there. So if it wasn't hackers, let's talk about how these grids are supposed to work. How does a problem in one spot cascade like this?
Right, it comes down to this concept of grid balancing, or frequency regulation. It's a constant juggling act.
Juggling what?
Juggling electricity supply and demand.
Yeah.
The amount of power being generated has to match, almost perfectly, the amount being used second by second.
Why so perfectly?
Because we can't easily store huge amounts of electricity on the grid itself, not like water in a reservoir. So it has to be generated pretty much exactly when it's needed. If supply and demand get too far out of whack, the system's frequency, its rhythm, if you like, goes off.
And that's bad.
Very bad. It can damage expensive equipment. So safety systems kick in automatically to prevent that, and that often means shutting parts of the grid down. Blackouts.
Ah, okay. So a failure like the interconnector potentially throws that balance off.
Precisely. And as a power consultant quoted in the Indian Express said, any interconnected grid is only as strong as its weakest link. Interconnectors are vital, but they're also potential points of failure.
So that weak link fails. How does that localized problem spread? You mentioned frequency mismatch.
Yes. If a major power line like an interconnector trips or a big power plant suddenly goes offline, the local balance is instantly disrupted. That part of the grid might experience a drop or surge in frequency.
And that spreads.
It can, yeah, like ripples in a pond. This frequency disturbance travels through the interconnected network. If other parts of the grid can't compensate quickly enough, or if the disturbance is too large, their own protective systems might trigger.
Leading to a cascade. One part shuts down, putting more stress on the next, which then shuts down.
Exactly. A cascading failure. That's why the consultant also stressed that huge failures like this probably have multiple triggers, not just one single smoking gun. It's complex.
It makes you realize how interconnected everything is. Has Europe seen anything like this before?
Oh, yes. The really big one people remember is 2003. Italy and Switzerland. Over 50 million people affected. That was traced back to a major power line fault.
50 million, wow.
And even more recently, 2021, there was another incident involving a France-Spain interconnector, actually. Left about 1 million people without power for a few hours.
So this isn't entirely unprecedented. These interconnectors seem to be a recurring theme.
They represent known vulnerabilities in highly interconnected systems. It underscores the need for constant monitoring and robust protection systems.
Okay, so beyond the interconnector and this atmospheric idea, were there other potential contributing factors mentioned? What else could have been straining the grid?
Well, the timing. Late April. Apparently, Spain and Portugal were experiencing some early summer heat.
Ah, so air conditioning.
Very likely. A sudden surge in demand for AC puts a lot of extra load on the grid, making that balancing act even harder. More demand requires more generation, instantly.
Right, more pressure on the system. What about the type of energy? Spain uses a lot of wind power, doesn't it?
It does. Spain is a big player in renewables, especially wind. And while that's great for the environment, of course, it does add another layer of complexity to grid management.
How so? Because the wind isn't always blowing.
Exactly. Wind power, like solar, is intermittent. Its output varies depending on the weather. Managing these fluctuations, ensuring supply always meets demand when a big chunk of your supply is variable, is a real challenge.
Especially without massive energy storage solutions yet.
Precisely. Without large-scale batteries or other storage, you need very sophisticated forecasting and potentially flexible backup generation, or ways to manage demand to smooth out those bumps. It's a challenge grids worldwide are grappling with as they integrate more renewables.
So it's possible the state of the renewable generation at that exact moment might have played some role in the grid's overall stability or lack thereof.
It's certainly something investigators will look at. How much wind was being generated? How stable was it? Did a sudden drop coincide with other problems? It's part of that complex picture.
It really is a balancing act then, isn't it? Integrating green energy but keeping the lights on reliably.
It absolutely is.
Now, the Indian Express noted that grid operators everywhere, including India, will be watching this Spanish-Portuguese event very closely. Why? What can they learn?
Because large grid failures are unfortunately valuable, if harsh, learning experiences. India, as you know, has had its own major grid collapses.
I remember 2012. That was huge.
Massive. The 2012 New W grid disturbance affected the northern, northeastern, and eastern grids.
Yeah.
Nearly 700 million people impacted, one of the biggest blackouts globally ever.
Then there was one before that, too.
Yes. 2002, the northern grid collapse. That was linked to issues like heavy fog and pollution affecting transmission lines. So Indian grid operators have direct experience with fragility.
So they'll study this European event to see what went wrong, how the system responded.
Exactly. Analyze the sequence of failures, see how effective the protection systems were, how quickly they could restore power, what communication breakdowns occurred, if any. All these details provide crucial data to improve their own grid's resilience and operating procedures. Lessons learned can hopefully prevent similar events here.
Okay, so let's try and summarize. We've got the France-Spain interconnector issue as a likely trigger, then this potential rare atmospheric phenomenon adding stress.
Possibly compounded by high demand from early heat waves.
And maybe underlying challenges related to managing intermittent renewable energy sources like wind, especially without large-scale storage.
Correct. It looks like a combination of factors is the most probable explanation, though the exact sequence and weighting are still under investigation.
It really underscores how these grids are vast interconnected systems. Benefits, yes, but also risks of problems spreading fast.
And maintaining stability isn't just about building strong lines. It's about smart management, technology, forecasting, and definitely developing better energy storage to handle renewables more smoothly.
So a final thought for our listeners, especially those preparing for the UPSC. Think about this. We're seeing these large-scale outages seemingly more often, or at least hearing about them more globally.
The impact is certainly growing as we electrify more aspects of life.
So what are the most critical investments, the most important policy shifts we need to make to build power grids that are truly resilient and reliable for the future, especially as we rely more on cross-border connections and variable renewables?
That's the core question, isn't it? Balancing cost, reliability, security, and the green transition.
Definitely something to ponder. It touches on infrastructure planning, energy policy, national security, all key
A
areas.
crucial debate for the coming years.
Absolutely. Well, if you found this deep dive helpful for your understanding, or particularly for your UPSC prep, please do give us a like, subscribe for more discussions like this, and maybe leave a comment with your thoughts or any questions.
We'd love to hear your perspectives.
And just a reminder, our main source for piecing together this initial picture was the Indian Express.